Welcome to the EchoCast episode 142, E3 predictions and more. This is a podcast about gaming on all platforms and of all genres that will cover news and speculation from the perspective of a lifelong gamer and lover of tech and games. Please take a moment to subscribe to and rate the podcast on whatever platform you listen to it on, especially Apple Podcasts and on YouTube, down there in the comments, even if it's just for the algorithm. This episode, we will talk about E3 predictions and hopes, Horizon Forbidden West, more Mass Effect thoughts, listener questions, and some big content updates. Thank you to our Patreon supporters for this month: Hassan, Christian, Darren, Tim, PK, Manmade, Golf, and Lunchbox. If you would like to be one of these supporters, please check out patreon.com/bondiesel. Okay, so jumping right into gaming news, the big topic this week is going to be E3 and some predictions. We have E3 starting here in a couple weeks, and I want to talk about it because I am very excited. Last year, I think a lot of people were really excited and thinking like, oh, cool, all of the companies can kind of do their own thing and it's going to be even better. But I think there were two factors in that didn't work the way people thought it would. One was that when everything shut down in March and the world had changed, you have to realize that by March, I would imagine most of the companies already had plans and were working significantly and probably getting towards completion on what they were going to do in June at E3 and around E3. And COVID changed everything, right? So they weren't able to do the same stuff that they were going to do. They had to redo everything. The other thing that I think happened was I don't really think the companies all handled the lack of like a central hub very well. Xbox and Sony both had new systems coming, and I don't really think either one of them did that well, especially at first. I think they both had really good kind of like shows or whatever you want to call them, presentations towards the end of the year, right before their systems came out. But I mean, like the Ubisoft forwards that came out, which are things I obviously pay close attention to, were pretty lackluster, at least in my opinion. Almost everything I saw. In hindsight, we'll talk about Mass Effect in a little bit. But even though at the time I hadn't even played Mass Effect yet, I still remember that Mass Effect 4 preview or teaser being the most notable thing from last year, in my opinion. And that didn't even come till the end of the year almost. And it wasn't because I cared about it at the time. I obviously do now, but at the time I could just see the hype and the reaction, and it felt like a very unique moment last year when a lot of the hype and stuff that was coming just felt kind of flat because it just didn't feel handled very well. So this year we have E3 again. We have this conference again, which it's kind of funny how COVID has maybe shortened our memories a bit, in that last year before COVID happened, there was a lot of talk about companies not participating in E3. Jeff Keighley had made a pretty big deal about not wanting to be a part of it because of a bunch of issues that were happening there. They had leaked everyone's private and personal information, or it had been hacked one way or the other. And E3 was in a rough spot. I remember discussions last year before COVID about whether E3 would continue to even exist. So this year is obviously not going to be a normal E3, but I really do think it's a chance for them to like put their foot down and say we are still relevant and we can change to become, you know, a thing again and not kind of the joke we've been. From listening to Greg Miller on Kind of Funny talk about how essentially he doesn't recognize any faces left at E3, at the ESA, who actually does E3. That it's literally like an entirely new cast or set of people working there. So hopefully that's a good thing because it kind of seems like it needed to change. So predictions and hopes and so on. I'm gonna kind of go through some of the notable things I care about. Obviously, there's a ton of people who are gonna be there. There's games there that you care about that I don't. So what I'll start with is either whether it's in the comments of this YouTube video, whether it's on my Twitter or on the EchoCast Twitter page, it's at Bondiesel or at the EchoCast. Let me know what you want. Let me know what you're looking forward to. And then next week, we'll still have some time to talk about that. And I'll talk about things maybe that aren't on my radar and I can look into them. Then I can be excited too. But for me, I'm a big Xbox guy. So Halo Infinite is the first thing. And that I can't think of a game or subject that's going to be at E3 that could possibly be as important for that project's company than Halo Infinite. Not necessarily because I think that Halo Infinite is going to be for everyone. It's not. But Halo Infinite is extreme. It's going to be a big flag for where Xbox and this litany of studios under them are going. And whether that's fair or not is up to you. It's probably not fair. But 343, this is, in my opinion, probably their last chance to show that they deserve to have this IP. 4 and 5 weren't great. And I think that's a fairly consistent opinion. I played through both of them, and I don't think that they were bad video games, but they just didn't seem to have the grasp on the IP that they needed to. Obviously, trying to replace Bungie is a tall task, to say the very least. But Halo Infinite has to be good. And what was interesting was last year when they were doing the reveals before they suspended and postponed the project was I thought the game looked fun. So the thing is the movement, the new kind of style that they're going for, if anything, even trying to go kind of old school a little bit with some of the styling, but the gameplay, I mean, I think that almost the Doom-esque gameplay that they're going for now that there's like a grappling hook and some other ways to traverse in the game, I thought those looked great. But then you have, oh, what was his name? Was it Chad or it didn't look the way people were expecting this like big showcase next gen game to look. And though technically it's not a next gen game, it's going to work on the old gen. But the issue I had is that I thought that a lot of the stuff looked worse than 5. And whether you like 5 or not, 5 is a nice looking game. Now I know some people don't like the armor, felt like they kind of went overboard with like Master Chief's design and stuff, but I think 5 is it still looks modern today if you play it. And Infinite didn't when they showed it last year. And they've done what's really cool. If you haven't been paying attention, Halo Infinite has been doing monthly updates, whether it's been on sound design or all kinds of topics, and it's been really cool. It's been very transparent, and that's been really exciting. And it seems like they're heading in the right direction. They've even shown updated models and stuff like that. Now, whether a game or whether a model looks good in a pre-rendered, very specific situation in a screenshot, and whether it's going to look good in motion is two very different things. We know that at this point. But I'm hopeful, and it's going to be interesting to see how they treat Infinite. because it's undeniably a big deal. It still should be Xbox's biggest IP, even though it may not be. And I'm curious too if they're gonna try to do a let's forget about last year and just show what it is now and move forward, or if they're going to do a well, this is what it looked like last year, and this is what it looks like now. This is what Chad looked like last year. This is what he looks like now. And to show that like we heard you, we understood that you didn't like the direction it was going or that we went, and so here's our rebuttal, here's our answer. And maybe it will work or not. Personally, I think that's what they should do. I think that there should be, even if it's a very short nod to like, hey, we threw something out there last year, it wasn't ready, and you can understand why that was the case, right? Like they were releasing this new system, they needed a Halo for the Series X, right? And so they were trying to make that happen, and it was a mistake, and I think they recognized that. Now there is the fun part of by them putting it out this year, it falls on the 20th anniversary of Halo, so that's kind of cool. And it's and Xbox itself, so it's not all bad. And just the way things went last year, I think it kind of makes sense that I think they got lucky that COVID happened. Not to give any silver lining to this awfulness, but if they had delayed and it wasn't COVID, or they couldn't kind of blame it on COVID, it would be seen much different. But we've seen so many delays, and we've seen the result of what happens when a game comes out that probably should have been delayed. Cough, cough, Cyberpunk. So I think that they've, between the transparency and the willingness to delay the game, and I think they have goodwill at this point. But E3 and this presentation is going to be a big moment for people to decide whether that goodwill was worth it or not. I'm super excited to see it. I want to see some gameplay. I want to see some comparisons. I want to see a BR announcement. I want to see a multiplayer showcase and a Forge showcase. I want to see it all. I can't wait. I hope they don't spoil too much of the story. I genuinely love the Halo story, the relationship between Shep. I've got Mass Effect on the mind. Between Master Chief and everyone else that's been in the series for a long time, especially Cortana, has always been my favorite. I can't remember the details of everything, but I'm assuming Cortana will still exist in this universe, and I am excited to see how that gets handled. Their romance, or whatever you consider it, has always been very compelling to me, and to see this borderline robot that is Master Chief humanized, and I hope they continue down that road. And yeah, I can't wait to see Halo Infinite. I hope it pays off. I think the next biggest thing coming from Xbox has got to be Starfield, partially because it's Bethesda's first like truly new IP in so long, but also because it's going to be hopefully coming out this year or early next year, and because we don't really know what it is. Everyone is assuming Fallout in space, which I think is fair. What I am predicting is I think it will be Fallout. I think it's going to be like a Fallout Mass Effect smashed together. That's partially because of recency bias on my part, because of my recent discovery of Mass Effect and my love for it. But it kind of makes sense. And the world is kind of devoid of that game right now. The concern, as always, with Bethesda games is that I'm a huge Fallout fan. And what's funny is I've gone through the last whatever number of years of my life thinking that Fallout did this whole like, ongoing and connected story thing the best. And now I've played Mass Effect, the original trilogy, which, whether you agree with all their choices and the way everything happened or not, whether you like it, I think it's hard to deny that it's the best trilogy that took choices from the first game and had it affect the third game, even in minor ways. That trilogy did it the best. And so and like Fallout 4 is a game I enjoy, but you really didn't have that many choices. You really didn't have that much impact on what was going on. Not the way that people were used to from Fallout games. And in the relationships made in Fallout, just in my opinion, pale in comparison to the ones made in Mass Effect. So I'm really hoping that in the best ways possible, Starfield basically is Fallout in space slash Mass Effect. I think that there is a hunger for that right now, and I would love to see it. When it comes to other games coming from Xbox, obviously everyone has their own opinions. You've got things like Avowed that will be coming at some point. I'm assuming that's probably a 2023 game, but we've got this is the year that, even though I don't expect many games to actually release in 2021 because of delays and just the way that with Xbox they've purchased all these studios, and we're hitting that like 2, 3, 4, 5 year mark where now some of these studios we're going to start seeing it pay off. I'm super excited about Hellblade 2. I didn't play Hellblade 1 until I think it was like a year and a half ago, and it was so good. It was right up there with the Red Dead and Mass Effect, and with the way it hit me like emotionally. And I really can't wait to see what they'll do with 2. You've got State of Decay 4, State of Decay 3 that will be coming. Hopefully we'll at least get a teaser for that. This will be the first time that the entire game has been developed with them owned by Microsoft. State of Decay 1 was obviously when they were on their own, that studio. State of Decay 2, they literally released State of Decay 2 like it was like a month after they got bought by Microsoft. So obviously Microsoft didn't have much influence. Their resources didn't help that game very much, at least at launch. Now that game, if you haven't played State of Decay 2, it's worth playing. I love it. It's a great game. And I haven't played it in a while, but I still do pay attention to their interaction with their community. And I can't think of a game that interacts with its community and continues to support the game any better than they have with State of Decay 2. So I hope that they've learned all those lessons, and between that and hopefully a bunch of awesome resources and money that they can inject into the third game, that they'll be able to take what's special about that series and just step it up big time. Because the first 2 games have been kind of allowed to live in that like AA kind of world, and to be a little janky, and to not look the best, and to be a little shallow. And I really think that this is going to become a moment where 3 probably needs to take a step up to that AAA, needs to take a step up in quality and depth and what that game is, because they have a great foundation that they can start from. State of Decay 3 is a game that I'm like super low-key excited about, that I can't wait to see. Another game that I don't expect to see too much from yet is Everwild from Rare. It's that game. The last thing I saw was that there was supposedly still talk within that studio of not really even knowing what that game is. So that game may be a 2023, 2024 type of project. I suspect we'll get maybe another Perfect Dark teaser. Surely that game is 2-3 years away at least. Maybe not. If you aren't aware, that obviously that's an old IP, and there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years about that being a like a quadruple A type project. It's supposedly getting the resources and the work and the manpower and woman power of even more so than the top games right now. And a lot of people consider games like The Last of Us over on the PlayStation a quadruple A game, something over a triple A game. So I don't expect a Perfect Dark like gameplay demo, but they've got to have something. So I hope to see that. Moving over to another company that will be participating in E3 that's close to my heart, if you're listening to this podcast, is Ubisoft. So they've already started some of their E3 activities. They did a Far Cry 6 quote unquote gameplay showing a couple days ago. I'm recording this at the end of May. That has been panned a little bit. One, because it looks like it's just Far Cry 5 with some more stuff, which to a lot of people is all they want. And if the story is fun to play through and not too bloated, I'm down as well. They got panned a little bit for their presentation though, because they did a YouTube premiere, which so it counts down from like 24 hours. Then when it was supposed to start, they had there was a 2 minute countdown from YouTube Premiere, and then there was a 30-minute countdown. So it said it was supposed to start like 12:30 Eastern, so it didn't actually start until like 1:02 Eastern. And then there was 12 minutes. The video was 12 minutes long and had like 6 or 7 minutes of gameplay. And it was like gameplay with quotes, because it wasn't like someone with a controller playing the game. It was PR, it was marketing footage. It was probably captured from gameplay, but it was conveniently edited. So that was kind of a big oof moment, in my opinion, at least. Of they just try to dress these things up so much. And like I think I said on Twitter, like there is marketing, there's people who are getting paid lots of money, and there's data that must tell them that doing these things is going to reach the most people and help them sell the most copies of the game. So, I don't expect that I'm the target audience for all of this stuff and the way they do things. But man, it's hard not to rip on them a little bit, because it's just Ubisoft, I think, right now has a weird thing of having a lot of flash and not a whole lot of balls, or however you would want to put it. They you have a game like Far Cry 5, which I liked. I enjoyed playing through it, and the ending is super cool. It's a neat story. But the problem is that Far Cry 5 is a 20 or 25-hour game that only needs to be like 10 hours. And you can say the same thing about the most recent iterations of the Assassin's Creed series. It's the current game, Valhalla, is kind of known at this point for being a game that, if you just try to buzz through it, you're talking about 40 to 50 to 60 hours to beat that game. Odyssey wasn't that bad. Odyssey was a little drawn out, but and level gated pretty heavily. But you could get it. I think I got through it in 15 or 20 hours. And then Origins was even better, I think. And now some people want that. Some people want that bloated experience. I don't. Valhalla, I never even got off. I never even went to England. I didn't care about characters. I didn't like gameplay. I thought the graphics looked kind of crappy. I just didn't enjoy my experience with that game. So I haven't even gotten out of the prologue because it's so bloated. So with this Far Cry 6, I hope that with these type of games, with this quote unquote Ubisoft style of game, I really hope that they get more into a style of, if you just want to buzz through the game and enjoy the main storyline, you can get through it in 10 or 15 hours, and it's fun and it's action packed and it moves. And then if you want that expanded experience, if you want that 20, 30, 40-hour experience or more like Valhalla, then you can get it on your own choice. But the problem with the game, it happened with Odyssey, and it's definitely an issue with Valhalla, and even with Far Cry 5 to a point, is they force you to do so much of the fluff, whether you want to or not. And that, I'm pretty hesitant about Far Cry 6. They always do a good job of marketing the Far Cry games. The marketing for Far Cry 5 was amazing. They portrayed this this cult that was going to be like super gritty and like scary and mysterious, and then you start the game up and they're like the most like PC designed cult I've ever seen in my life, and they weren't very. Ubisoft has really gotten into this thing of being like, well, we're not making political commentary, but you have this like what would in all reality be this like right-wing nationalist cult in the middle of Colorado or whatever, who ends up being like the most diverse like whatever cult in the world. It just felt weird, especially because the marketing portrayed them very differently and portrayed the leader and all of everything around that that game. And then you get into the game and it's not that gritty, and it was very almost goofy or not serious, which bummed me out. I want, I know Far Cry is a fun series. They have, animals with clothes on, and they have the recurring character that's in every single game, and he's always doing crazy hijinks. So maybe I'm asking for something they aren't intending to do. But Far Cry, I assume, is going to be their big push this time, and I don't know. It looks like more of the same, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Um, for me personally, and if you're listening to this podcast, I am hoping to get something about Heartland for the Division, this free to play game that's coming. That I'll be very careful about what I say about it. So that's going to probably be about it. But I do hope we get some type of big info drop about that. And then what the Division 2 content that's coming. We know that there's more coming by the end of the year, basically. I have to imagine that at this point, what they're going to be doing has to be set in some kind of stone, which hopefully means that they're going to be able to put together at least a teaser or some type of trailer or some type of video where Yannick is on there and says, we know you're all highly anticipating this, what's coming, and here's what we're working on. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world, but there needs to be something, at least in my opinion. What that's going to be, I don't know. We know we're getting a new mode for Division 2, and I hope that they're either going to be revamping or putting in a bunch of stuff to kind of revitalize that game. For full honesty to my Division fans, I have barely touched the game since Phalau's mission. I've tried to jump in and do some of these replay seasons and to just get in and do some control points or something, and I just have other things I want to do. And so my plea as a player is, give us something that makes me want to jump back in, even if that means I don't do it until the end of this year. Just give me something. And then what maybe we'll have the mysterious and often asked for Splinter Cell teaser that everyone's been asking for, to not put it in some garbo game like Breakpoint. Sorry if you like Breakpoint, but I don't, and they've done nothing to change that opinion in the last year and a half, 2 years. They've got to stop abusing that IP, man. They've got to do it eventually. And I know that the thing about Splinter Cell is that I've asked people multiple times though, like, do you really want today's Ubisoft to do another Splinter Cell game? Because here's what it's going to be. It's probably going to be on the Anvil Next engine. Which is the same as Breakpoint, which, at least if you're like me, that doesn't seem very attractive, because I don't like the way that engine feels with the games I've played on it. And it's going to be some open world. It's probably going to be some type of looter shooter, some type of games as a service. So there's a part of me that says, like, be careful what you ask for with Splinter Cell, because there's a decent chance that they may put out a game that you do not want, and that may take that series down a path that we've seen Assassin's Creed go down, Ghost Recon go down, and The Division go down. That maybe you don't want that yet. Maybe you want to wait until Ubisoft gets off this games as a service idea, if they ever do. Maybe you want them to be in a spot where they need to make a really cool 25-hour single player experience that isn't all based on cooperative multiplayer play and PvP, whatever, and what Ubisoft is today. So an interesting thing that came up to me when I was looking at the potential lineup of stuff that might come from Ubisoft is how so many of their main pillars kind of feel like they need a reboot. Like Siege is Siege. That's their competitive. That's doing its thing. I don't expect them to. It would be cool to see like a Rainbow Six game come back. That's like back on what Rainbow Six used to be. That's like a single player game or a co-op game like Vegas, or even some of the OG Rainbow Six games. Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, Ghost Recon. It would sure be nice to see them go back to their roots, in my opinion. And the division, we'll talk about the division. We'll get into that actually in the listener questions. So another notable thing that I think could be interesting, because it's probably going to be a hardware announcement, is Nintendo. So I can't remember exactly if they're working with E3 directly or if they're just going to do something around E3. But the Switch Pro, an upgraded Switch, has been rumored for over a year now. And there's even been some pretty, it's like kind of like the worst kept secret, right? And it's essentially supposed to be a HD Switch, which is probably needed, and a little bit more powerful system. And I don't know if I'm even interested in buying something like this, but I do think um, it's going to be interesting to see. Nintendo has been doing their own thing for a while. They outsell Sony and Microsoft, and I don't think they really give a crap what those companies are doing necessarily. They aren't trying to make a more powerful system. They aren't trying to compete in that way. They are trying to compete in a different way, and they're highly successful. When it comes to some other things that we hope, or that I hope to see, they mostly come from EA. I really hope, and I can't remember off the top of my head if I don't think EA is directly participating in E3, but they'll definitely do their stuff around it. And Battlefield 6 is to be shown, right? I mean, it's at this point it's been rumored and teased and leaked so much at this point that we have to see Battlefield 6, or it sounds like they're going to rebrand it just Battlefield. If you, I didn't even stream or really do anything social media wise back in the day, but Battlefield 3, 4 are some of my favorite games ever, especially for multiplayer. The single player has always been kind of take it or leave it. But the multiplayer of 3 and 4 is just so good. So I am just really hoping to see them, finally show that to us. I really hope that they can try to recapture, that magic from 3 and 4, because Battlefield 1 or whatever it was with World War 1 and Battlefield 5 with World War 2 just they gave up on 5, and they never even ended up releasing all the content that they intended on. And they just, I think that time is just kind of past. I think people know what they want from Battlefield now, and I really hope we get it. I want to see modern warfare. I want to see big giant maps with things exploding everywhere and squad gameplay. And I really want to recapture some of that old, gritty, cool Battlefield 3 and 4. And then the last game that I'm hoping to see something from, and we'll see, I suspect we won't see it till the end of the year. I think we'll get another teaser for Mass Effect 4. Obviously, this has newfound excitement for me. I've been, I'm a year late to the picnic, or 6 months or 7 months late to the picnic or party. I've been studying that trailer. They put out that teaser, and everyone's got all kinds of opinions. I'll talk about mine in another part of this podcast about what Mass Effect 4 is going to be. But I'm really hoping to see another teaser. That's a game I'm not realistically expecting until probably 2023. But I still think it's fun to talk about it and think. So like I said at the beginning of this segment, though, let me know what you're excited for, and I'm happy to either look into it or, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't talk about that. Tell me in the YouTube comments, on Twitter, wherever, what are you excited for from E3? Second topic here, the Horizon Forbidden West preview that we got. PlayStation did a state of play a couple days ago and showed off their new, the sequel to their big Horizon Zero Dawn game that came out years ago now. And what's so funny, so I'm not a PlayStation guy. I know Horizon Zero Dawn is now on PC, which I may try it out there, because I actually have no interest in that game, especially playing it on a console. So even if I had a PlayStation, I don't think I would have played it, because the mechanics and the movement and all of that game just looks like it'd be maddening on a controller. But now that it's on PC, I'm slightly considering it because of the way that game plays. Now, that's abnormal for me. I personally much prefer third-person shooter games of all kinds on controller, which therefore typically on my Xbox. But the way that game, where you lay traps and the way that you have to be really precise and things like that. That's a game that's Horizon Zero Dawn is a game that I never really had any interest in playing and still really don't, but is a game that visually is just so cool to see, and is a game that I've watched all kinds of lore videos about, explaining the story, speculating about things, and it's a cool world. So to see this Forbidden West gameplay was really fun, and to see kind of how they're stepping that franchise up. Um, it looked great. It almost looked too good to be true, and that's kind of a weird thing. So I believe the game is going to be for PS4 and 5. So we're still kind of in that crossover generation of new games where they just simply are going to be held back at least a little bit by the old systems. And what's going to be really interesting is in like a year or two when games start releasing only for the new systems, and how those games are allowed to fully take advantage. Maybe it won't be that big of a deal. Maybe it won't be as impressive as you think. We'll have to wait and see. But this looked great. It looked fun. It looked frenetic. It looked very trailery. I know it was technically gameplay, but yeah, I mean, it's how this goes. But PlayStation games do a pretty good job of backing up what they show for the most part. Unless it's Spider-Man, puddle reflection shadows or whatever, and all that silliness. It was interesting seeing some commentary on Twitter and such about how there's some devs I saw talking about how they simply don't believe that you'll see that game be anything more than 30 FPS, even at lower resolutions, because of the way it's being presented. That's going to be interesting if that's the case. I've seen a lot of people say like, oh, for single player games 30 FPS is fine. It's the multiplayer games that you need that 60. I'm telling you, kind of getting ahead of myself here, playing the Mass Effect Legendary Edition at 60 FPS and then going and playing Andromeda, which is only at 30 FPS because they never did a 4K patch for it, a 4K 60 FPS patch for it. Once people touch that 60 FPS, man, I think that as much as the PlayStation 5 and the Series X and even Series S Xboxes really focused on that 4K, 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 4K. I think here in the next year, 2, 3 years, you're going to see those companies stop pushing 4K a whole lot, and you're going to see them start pushing 60 FPS a whole lot more. So technically, is it possible that this Forbidden West, even on PS5, is it only going to play 30 FPS, whether it's 4K or lower? Maybe, but you're going to see the importance of like dynamic resolution and stuff like that become super important, because I think now that everyone's started touching 60 FPS games, and if they're console only players, they've never really had that before in most games. You're going to see people caring a whole lot more about 60 FPS than 4K. I know I do. I can take or leave 4K. 1440p looks great, especially with my setup, and with most people's setup, 4K isn't even fully utilized. So I'll be curious to what comes out about that with Horizon. But yeah, overall, I mean, the aesthetic of Horizon is so gorgeous, it's so cool, and it's almost like, it's not steampunk, but it's almost like, I don't know, like tech punk or something. I don't even know how to describe it. Forest tech punk. It just looks great. So even though it's not a game I'll probably really ever play, it's definitely a game I'll keep an eye on, and I am excited to eventually check out the lore videos and story and see how it carries on from the first game, because the story from the first game of Horizon is just great. Aloy's a really interesting character, and the way that they present, that world and what that world used to be, which is our world essentially, and what they did to themselves to cause the world to fall into what Horizon presents, is really neat. So, and then the final little segment here is kind of a continuation of my first impressions from last week. I'm talking about the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So last week I talked about how I played through 1, 2, and 3 pretty quickly, and it just really loved it and was really hit by it. This is a little bit of a spoilery thing, so if you haven't ever played the 10-year-old game Mass Effect 3 or its predecessors, then listener, be warned, I guess. Um, but I want to talk about the ending of Mass Effect 3. Uh, I actually played through Andromeda and beat Andromeda as well, and then talk about Mass Effect 4 and some of my speculation or hopes. It's really kind of a mix. So with Mass Effect 3, the ending, if you remember back when it came out about almost 10 years ago now, was controversial. And the main reason it was controversial is because for a series that really was heavy on decisions you made in the first game and the second game, carrying over and impacting the story pretty significantly, it essentially threw most of that out. So there was a DLC that came out that was like an extended cut and didn't fix everything. There's still people who don't like the way Mass Effect 3 ends, but it made it a little bit better. It gave some more in it, and especially, this is the very spoilery part, one of the endings, if done the proper way, actually has the protagonist live, which every other ending doesn't. Every other ending suggests that the protagonist dies, and that will become important when we talk about Mass Effect 4. So I like the ending. So for anyone who is familiar with the series, I did the non-Shep Lives Destroy ending. When I read about all of the endings, and it's the only ending I like. I don't really think that the other endings fit at least my Shep. So I did the destroy ending. In hindsight, I was like 3,000 military strength points away from the perfect ending. I thought I had it, and I was very wrong. And we'll talk about what I'm doing to alleviate that. But yeah, the destroy ending's the best in my opinion. The thing about Mass Effect 3, and I've seen people say this and I completely agree, is the thing with Mass Effect 3 is that you have to look at Mass Effect 3 as the entire game is the finale. It's not just the last, third or the last fourth of the game. It's the entire game, and it is a little bit more kind of pushing you towards the end. It's not quite as expansive and things like that. From the moment Mass Effect 3 starts, it's wrapping up the story. And I think, and that's how it felt to me before I even understood all of the controversy and stuff like that. So in the game I've finished, if you've played the games, you understand it's important the romance decisions you made. So with my Shep, it was Liara in the first game, and then Tali in the second and third game. And like I've hit a moment where there's a chance, and I've still been kind of sitting on it, but I think that the Tali character they wrote and the voice acting that was done might be my favorite performance ever in a video game. I think it is, and it's partially because, and I've talked about this a little bit on Twitter and stuff, is it's partially because that character very, very much reminds me of my wife, in a very good way. And even the character's arc in the game 1 through 3 reminds me a lot of my wife. My wife and I met when I was like a month away from graduating. We started dating, and she was only a sophomore in college, and to her own admission was a somewhat naive person, and kind of, was still growing up and things like that, while I was leaving college and was being kind of forced to grow up. And what I really like about that character is that in the first game, she's on her pilgrimage. She's, very young. She's figuring things out. And then by the end of the game, by the end of the third game, she's an admiral. She's a highly respected person in her culture. And that really reflects, the person she reminds me of, and my wife, who is now, going towards 10 years of being a teacher, is highly respected and very, very good at what she does, very confident in herself. And so I really saw a lot of similarities in them. So that character definitely has grabbed onto me in a way I did not expect. And the mannerisms of that character, and they just do such a good job of selling that character to the player, if you choose to establish that relationship and continue it. And then that leads to the end of the game. And this is obviously spoilers, so skip ahead a couple minutes or whatever if you don't want any. But if you continue the relationship with Tali in the third game, there's a moment like 2/3 of the way through where you have a conversation with her where she basically talks about her growth and her character arc, and then at the end, Shep tries to say something along the lines of like, "Well, that's because you worked hard and you learned, you did all these things," and she says something along the lines of like, "No, it's because of you. You were the difference." And there's something about that conversation and the way they present that relationship, that moment is pretty big. But then you get to the end, and there's a moment where Shep is running into what should be his certain death, and Tally gets hurt, and he gets her evac. And there's a moment where um, I don't really want to like say the words because it won't make sense and it will spoil. But there's just they have there's a moment, there's a uh, exchange between Tally and Shep at the end of the game that to me is the most emotional interaction I've ever experienced in a game, and genuinely had me in like tears, like had me upset. And it was so cool for a game to do that to me because games have made me emotional before. The Red Dead games, both of them, especially the second one, even Haven, which I played late last year and have raved quite a bit about, Hellblade. There's been all kinds of games that have like emotionally touched me. But the exchange between the quote unquote final exchange between Shep and Tally in Mass Effect 3 is like my favorite interaction between two video game characters, and really two characters in media, whether it's movies or books or TV shows. I mean, it's right up there, if not my favorite ever. Just so good. I highly suggest you can look it up if you want to look up like Tally relationship, on YouTube and stuff. You can see it. But if you haven't played it, um, I'm playing through the game again, and I know that this time it's not going to feel the same because I know what happens, and that first time I didn't. Um, it's still pretty dope though. But it's just this game, and now I'm kind of curious and excited to play through the game multiple times over the next couple of years until 4 comes out, to see if the other moments hit like that, because I assume every character that you can engage with has that similar has some type of final moment that's really big. But something tells me none of them are going to hit me the way that one did. It was very uh, just kind of depressing, but also sweet and just heartbreaking. It's a combination of the writing and the voice acting and all the work they did to establish that relationship leading up to that moment. It's just freaking awesome, man. So really, really great. Now the thing that happens in the ending I picked, there's multiple endings that your Shep can decide to do different things. And the one I picked, he decides to do the destroy, which kills all of the bad guys, but also will kill a bunch of the good guys. And the implication is that Shep dies, because Shep does definitely die in the other ones, in the other endings. But if you do this ending a certain way, he doesn't, or at least there's a heavy hint. It shows him in the rubble at the very last second. He takes a big breath, so it implies that he's alive. And because of that, I'll get to that. So before I talk about that, I want to talk about Andromeda, because then I'm going to talk about Mass Effect 4, and both of those conversations matter. So I played Andromeda. I had, everyone, if you're a gamer, you've heard about Mass Effect Andromeda, and how terrible the animations were, and how a lot of the fans of the trilogy didn't like it, and yada, yada, yada. So I figured, hey, I'm on a kick right now. I don't want to jump right back into Mass Effect trilogy. I'd like to have a little bit of a break, to get over the emotional scarring, and Andromeda is fine. The problem with Andromeda is that, like, in a lot of ways, from like a quality of life perspective, they really did I thought, a pretty good job of trying to bring Mass Effect into the next generation of gaming, which at the time was Xbox One and PS4. And you can see there's a bunch of things they did to just the way the game plays, and the menus and the interactions and the conversations, and the way the bases work and their ship navigation works. That it's better. It's better than the trilogy. The problem is that the story isn't great. The characters aren't very compelling. This is all my opinion. Um, the things that matter the most, see, in the trilogy, the combat and the gameplay kind of takes second stage, where the characters and the interactions and the story took first stage. In Andromeda, the combat and the navigation and the gameplay is pretty good, and the combat, I would say, it's excellent. But then the story and characters and interactions are like third stage. And not to mention they went open world, and parts of it are honestly great, but most of it's empty and it feels very grindy in a lot of ways. The other main issue I found with Andromeda, well, there's two more issues that I want to bring up. One, the length of the game. I beat it in like 9 hours, and I thought I was only like halfway through at the most. It just the game was meant to have sequels, and it was definitely meant to have DLC, because it ends on like a huge cliffhanger. Um, and then the final thing is oh, of course I'm not gonna remember what they're called. The alien race, not the enemies. The enemies are just like super generic and just seem like enemies ripped from the trilogy. But the friendly faction, that the friendly species that you run into, just look so bad. They look they look like human cat hybrids from like a Star Wars animated show, but they're in a like realistic aesthetic world. And so they look so bad. And what's so wild about them is that on their home and their colonies and their locations that you go to, and you're around them and their people, there's even art showing them on the walls. And what it looks like is it's probably like concept art of what they were thinking of when they were designing this species, and they look great. They kind of look like Garrus is a Turian, and they kind of look like a Turian. Like they look really sleek and strong and intimidating, but they have like a little bit of a different look to them. Um, and then it just seems like they just must not have had time to implement that vision, because the things you see walking around, they just look weird, and they made them really bright colored, and they just like I get that they wanted to introduce like new species because it was a new galaxy, but man, this wasn't it. They just look so bad, and it's like so distracting, and one of them like joins your crew, and every time you see him on screen, it's just like you see these other aliens that are established in the trilogy, and they look like you would expect. They're humanoid, like they look like aliens, but they don't like make your brain like break. And then they show the Angara. That's what they're called, the Angara race, or species, whatever. And they're the worst. So like Andromeda, if you're a big fan of the trilogy, it's at least worth playing through the story. I wouldn't dawdle. I just burned through the story and beat it, and was like, okay, that was fine. The combat's fun. The movement is great. Um, that basically you have a jetpack and a dash, and it's super fun to play with. And the weapons feel okay, especially as you upgrade them. But it's especially that jetpack. The movement feels great. So what's funny is that this conversation leads to talking about Mass Effect 4, which we know is coming probably in years. But what's funny about it is Andromeda actually made me feel better about what's coming. We know that Andromeda was made by not the A team, and we know that Mass Effect 4 is being worked on by like most of the people who did the trilogy. And so if they combine technologically what they were trying to do with Andromeda with some of that original feel of the trilogy, there's a lot of potential there. And Andromeda somehow actually makes me more excited for 4, because it seemed like from a technical standpoint, there were things happening in Andromeda that were great, that were going to be really cool. But then, there was another part of the team that just didn't come through for reasons that probably weren't entirely their fault. So then we have this situation with Mass Effect 4, and we know it's coming eventually, and now I want to talk about that. Okay, so Mass Effect 4. There's basically there's a lot of predictions right now. The only thing we really have are some kind of random tweets and stuff from the game director, who's not Casey Hudson, which is a big thing. Casey Hudson was the head guy for 1, 2, and 3, um, and he came back, and then he left in December of 2020. I'm not super worried about that, but so in my head, when they fix quote unquote the ending of Mass Effect 3, they added more context and more impact to the endings, which is what people wanted. But with only one of the endings, did they add so much that it included a protagonist lives. So to me, that tells me, and because just if you look up the endings, the one that makes the most sense and the one that they added your character living is a destroy ending, and it's the quote unquote good ending because you gain so many points. It'll make more sense when you play it. So to me, that is going to be their canon ending, and that's what's going to lead into 4. So there's kind of two minds right now that I've noticed in the Mass Effect community of, it seems like there's people who have taken some information that the game director has said and think that Mass Effect 4 is going to take place like 400 years in the future, which would match up the the Milky Way galaxy with what we played in Andromeda, in the Andromeda galaxy. It would then put the two worlds into the same timeline. And then there's people who think that Mass Effect 4 is going to take place not long after 3 and continue the story of those characters and so on. So my take on it is, what I think is going to happen is I think they're going to do the thing where it's going to jump forward in time. What I want to happen is that it will pick up after 3. So the reason I think it could take place after 3 is that in the ending, in the destroy ending, these mass relays, which all the alien races and humans use to get around the universe really quickly, that's also what the big bad, the antagonist, uses to try to destroy the whole universe or the whole galaxy. Those are destroyed as part of destroying the bad guys. But what you find and what you read about and you see or you hear in the as the game ends is that it actually doesn't take them that long to fix those things and to get people moving around again, as in like just a couple years at most. And so in the trailer, the teaser they showed one of these relays still busted up. And so that tells me that this game could take place within a couple years of the end of 3, because we know that they fix those things up really quickly, within a couple years. So there you go. So that's now I'm super biased, because what I'm hoping is that whatever choices you make in 1, 2, and 3 are going to carry over to 4, and that Honey Badger, who I've communicated with on Twitter, even kind of pointed out that potentially maybe the whole point of this legendary edition was that so they could pull a Mass Effect 3 file, a save, to Mass Effect 4, because that probably isn't possible with the original trilogy. They probably can't pull a save file to a whole new game on a new engine and new everything. So there's potential that when they did this legendary edition, they designed it in such a way that your save file from 3 would be carried over. So what I hope is that 4 actually does take place shortly after 3. It does carry on Shep's journey, at least for one more game. And the main reason I think that's likely is for what I've already said, and because I think after Andromeda, they have to do some crazy fan service. And while it would be attractive to just try to move on to a new trilogy and a whole new team and everything, I really, that maybe have been the intent at one point. I do think that they are going to throw a bone to the community. And I think the best way to do it for most people is going to be to give us one more run all these years later on new tech, all these upgrades, one more run for the old man, even though he's already been through so much. So A big reason that people think it's taking place way in the future is that it does appear that at least one character has already been confirmed for Mass Effect 4 that's from the original trilogy, and it's Liara, who seems like she's supposed to be like your canon relationship in the game, because she's just so heavily part of the game. Even if you choose not to romance her, she's still a huge part of the game. And she appears in this teaser that they showed last year, and a lot of people were looking at the fact that her face is kind of wrinkly and she looks old. This particular alien race in the series can be over 1,000 years old. So in the original trilogy, she's only a little over 100, and so they're saying that, like, well, she looks a lot older, so this is probably 300 or 400 years later, and she's like now like a quote unquote adult of her species, or and that's what's happening. The problem is that in the teaser at the very end of it, she leans over and picks something off the ground, and it's the protagonist. It's a piece of his armor. Uh, so obviously that's supposed to be cryptic and deceptive, and we'll have to wait. You can only speculate so much, but it seems like they're going to try to bring back Shep in some capacity, the protagonist from the first three games. It may not be as an actual person. It may be the idea of him or his experience or something. I think that is likely that it is going to be way in the future, because the game director has said that they do want Andromeda to matter in the fourth game, and that's kind of hard to do if you try to base it hundreds of years before Andromeda even happens. So we'll have to see how that pans out. My best case scenario, if they move it hundreds of years in the future, is that maybe Mass Effect 4 will have like a prologue that will use your save file from the third game, and will give you kind of like a closure moment of whoever you had a relationship with, whatever choices you made at the end of 3. It gives you kind of this like, and then this is what happened, and now hundreds of years in the future we find Liara and she's doing this thing, and then that puts it in line with Andromeda. That's my best guess for how it's going to work out. Obviously, I have no idea. I've only, kind of been jumping into this fairly recently, but I would say it's either going to take place right after 3. It's going to have a prologue from 3 leading into something way in the future, or it's just going to go straight to the future and they're going to make some type of callbacks to what happened after 3 with Shep. We'll have to see. Okay, so moving on to a couple listener questions. We have Stephen W. from Twitter asked a couple questions here. Do you believe games at some point will release a mostly bug and issue free state if the COVID/world/production issues are no longer directly impacting the outcome, or are buggy releases now an acceptable norm given the sales still being generated? That one, yeah. Because we were getting buggy games before COVID. So I think people don't think about or realize that games have always been buggy. And, even going back to the generation that like Mass Effect was coming out, right? Mass Effect is still buggy. And I think what's happened is that even at that time, but especially now, games, their scope and scale just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But the teams don't really get that much bigger. The engines don't get that much better. The resources don't get, aren't keeping up with the scale increasing. So I think that hopefully it gets better. But the problem is kind of like what you said, the sales are still there. So unfortunately, I still think that, and different companies have different degrees of bugginess. I think Rockstar games tend to come out in a little bit better shape than Ubisoft games. They also spend 2 or 3 times more and probably a lot more money on those games. So, and then the second part of Steven's question here was, given Outriders' somewhat old school approach was a success, given its budget and partnership with Game Pass, do you think it was because of Game Pass, or is it a failure because now they're dropping like flies? I've paraphrased. So Outriders is funny to me because they push the narrative of we are not a games as a service so hard. And Technically, they aren't. But what is interesting to me is that it they basically seem like a games as a service that just didn't promise any more service. So that game is, for all intents and purposes, complete. The $60 you pay or whatever, you play it, you beat it, and it's over. And they have some expeditions. I know they have some in-game content, but not much. And that, I assume, their player count is dwindling now. It's probably diving hard, even though they did have a lot of people playing it at one point or another. And so what's funny about Outriders is, yeah, they didn't go down the quote unquote games as a service with, putting in microtransactions and all that stuff. But essentially, it's like if the Division 2 came out and they gave us, World Tier 5, and then it was just it. And then technically it's not a games as a service, but it also isn't a game that provided any more content that people wanted. Now, Outriders, I assume, made enough money that they probably will put out some DLC. But yeah, the whole Outriders thing, I really don't think they were as revolutionary as they made themselves out to be. I think they just put out a games as a service game with no more service. And that's okay. It worked. Seems like they probably made a ton of money. The game did well. I personally didn't like it. I thought it felt like bad Gears of War, with looter shooter mechanics. I'm also finding myself kind of sick of looter shooters, so maybe that was a bigger part of it. So I think that you may see that happen more, but man, games trying to do the games as a service thing they fail a lot, but they still kind of fail up. So we'll have to see. Stephen, thank you for the questions. Those are great. This is actually a really old question from weeks ago that I've never gotten to, but on Twitter, or on Reddit, I got a direct message from Verndog on there saying, how do you fix the Division PvP? Talking about the Division here. I've heard your quips about it, but if you're in charge of Division 3, what do you do to make PvP relevant? I reboot the series entirely and make it a realistic shooter. And then I make the PvP completely separate from the single player. That's the only way to do it, in my opinion. I don't think, because it hasn't happened yet, you can make a looter shooter a balanced PvP game. Destiny comes closest, and I've never seen anyone who likes Destiny and likes the PvP ever pretend like it's like a competitive PvP game or that it's balanced. And it even has, in my impression and belief, a much more streamlined RPG kind of system with its gear and everything. So in theory, it should be easier to balance than Division is, and they still struggle. Yeah. So my simple answer is I would make it not a looter shooter, or I would go down a more traditional game path, basically referring back to like Future Soldier, Ghost Recon. Make it a more realistic game that doesn't take 1,000 bullets to kill something, and then you can make a PvP experience that is maybe a little bit quote unquote better for more people. The second part of Verndog's question here is, what does the Division 3 have to do to go from surprisingly popular to a mainstay of the looter shooter world and truly compete with Destiny? They can't. That's my super quick, simple answer. They can't compete with Destiny. They never will. And that's because Destiny has an entire studio and their entire budget. I know they're working on another game, but stay with me here. That Bungie is completely dedicated to making Destiny a success. And Ubisoft isn't, and Massive isn't. I've even had conversations with devs who've worked on the Division, and they intended for it to end. The intention with Division 1 and 2 was never for it to be a game people play for thousands of hours. If they want to, that's great. But they never made those games with that intention, the way Destiny has. So they can't compete with them because they have a different goal. They're investing different resources. Destiny won't be usurped by Division ever. So kind of going back to my last answer, how would I make it more popular than it is, and to make it a mainstay? It would be to go to a completely different genre, to take over the genre that Ghost Recon Future Soldier was in, and that Breakpoint Wildlands has abandoned. That more realistic, story-based shooter that has great PvP. I'm starting to sound repetitive. I'm sorry. The final question from Verndog here is: what gear system do you like better between Division 1 and 2? What did you like about each? What did you hate? And what should they use going forward? So, Division 1 was both too complicated and too simplistic, in my opinion. The biggest issue I had with Division 1 was that so many of the talents and so much of the gear was useless, were completely pointless talents. There were so few gear pieces that were actually usable that it just became such a small meta, such a narrow meta. Division 2's initial gear system, which I know a lot of people liked, I didn't, simply because it catered to such a small percentage of players, because there was just too many variables. And then you still had a lot of useless talents and useless attributes, where I think the Warlords of New York and Forward version, while it was more simple, had fewer pieces with talents on it. Like, I understand why some people didn't like it. I still think it was better. And I think that the Warlord, the version Gear 2.0 in Division 2 was way closer to being able to be balanced than the original version for PvP, even though they never did it, because I don't think anyone has touched Division 2 PvP balancing since like Division 2 released. So I definitely preferred Division 2's Gear 2.0 because it's closer to Destiny's. And while it may be too simplistic for some people, I think it expanded the meta, especially in PvP. But as far as I can tell, there's at least some more options in PvP. The thing is that it's hard to judge whether Gear 2.0 helped PvP or not because they never balanced PvP. So there was never a taking advantage of Gear 2.0 really to try to use that more simple system, and to mold PvP to be more balanced around that new system. It's just essentially been abandoned. So I prefer Gear 2.0, even though I know that will probably be somewhat controversial. Okay, final section here, content updates. I have updated the branding to the podcast and had kind of a big thread on Twitter talking about how I want to kind of talk about more broad subjects, as this podcast has probably clued you into, talking about just game and tech in general. I do still want to have like a special place for Division, the Division from Ubisoft, where I will talk about basically when there's Division news. I'll do special short episodes of the podcast, or if it coincides with an actual episode, a normal episode that I want to do weekly, then I'll just do a big segment in there, because I don't want to abandon, I would assume, the majority of people who listen to this podcast still. I want to provide that information to them, but I also just, between Division 1 and 2, I was able to fake it till I made it. There's enough time, there was enough stuff to talk about, and there just isn't anymore, especially because for all intents and purposes I don't anticipate a Division 3 for 3 or 4 years at least, if not more. And I don't know if Heartland is going to fill that gap. We'll see. And then whatever's coming for Division 2 at the end of the year, I don't know. And I don't think I'm going to do a whole podcast on whatever mobile game they put out. So let me know what you think about this. I am always open to suggestions and ideas for the podcast. I want to keep doing this podcast. I want to do it weekly. I enjoy that. And I want to talk about all kinds of gaming things and even tech things when they come up. So that's where we're going. But I would really like to hear what you think and feel about that. I will be appearing on Sergeant Graybeard's Diplomats of the Division podcast soonish. He's had Trick Dempsey on there. I believe Mab and Goose, the cosplayers, were just on there. And we're trying to hook up at some point and do that thing. So be on the lookout for that. I will tweet it out and do all those things when it happens. And I do want to start kind of trying to get back into streaming a little bit. I might stream some Mass Effect stuff now that my playthroughs are getting into like replay territory. I'm not super worried about like hyper focused on it. I really want to stream some of The Ascent when that comes out. It's like a kind of like a Diablo viewpoint twin stick shooter that's an RPG set in like a cyberpunk world. I've been I've had an eye on it for a long time, and I really want to check it out. So be on the lookout for some streams. I do want to try to get back consistent with that at some point. We'll see. I'm shooting for the end of summer to really get back into it. And that's what we have for this week. So I am Bon Diesel on Twitch, so you can check me out there when I do stream. On Twitter, you can check me out at Bon Diesel or at the EchoCast. If you want some EchoCast or Bon Diesel merch, check out streamlabs.com/Bon Diesel. That's all I have. So until next time.